And the ways in which we use hydrogen will create substances in the ways in which we use them.
Welcome to the Hydrogen Energy News Interview Series. My guest today is Jeffrey Beyer, founder and director of Zest Associates, based in the UAE. He's sustainability strategist with international expertise across climate and energy policy, corporate strategy, green finance, clean tech, innovation, and business planning. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jeffrey, tell me, what are the recent trends in the hydrogen investment within the UAE?
The UAE is a really burgeoning hydrogen market. It is, in the Middle East, one of the leaders and definitely globally an international leader. COP28 was just held in the UAE, and it encouraged a lot of the biggest players in hydrogen and in climate change to gather here in Dubai and boost their commitments. Investment in hydrogen in general is growing, but far lower than it needs to be in order to reach net zero goals. When we look at final investment decisions globally, we're only at about 4 or 5% of what's needed to achieve net zero. So in the UAE and all over the world, I think the scale and speed of investment needs to accelerate enormously.
Tell me, how do global factors such as shifts in energy demand and environmental concerns impact the current hydrogen investment in the UAE?
Hydrogen is an opportunity to reduce emissions, especially from so-called hard-to-abate sectors like shipping, aviation, iron and steel, glass making, ceramics, and so on. Hydrogen itself isn't a great molecule for these reasons, right? If it wasn't for climate change, we wouldn't be using hydrogen for all of these applications. But because hydrogen is low carbon at the point of use, then it allows those emissions to be reduced if hydrogen itself is produced in a low carbon way. So we're seeing this shift towards hydrogen just starting in some of these hard to abate sectors. And what that means actually is that there's going to be a huge increase in energy demand to produce hydrogen, either from electricity, so producing hydrogen with renewables called green hydrogen, or producing hydrogen from splitting natural gas and capturing and sequestering the CO2, so-called blue hydrogen. Some estimates put final energy demand in 2050 for hydrogen at about 14 to 25% of all the energy that's used in the world. So we're going to have a huge shift, increase in energy demand in order to decarbonize sectors using hydrogen that currently are quite emissions intensive.
What challenges and opportunities are currently shaping the investment climate in the UAE?
The UAE has a stable investment climate. It's one of the reasons why the Middle East is favored compared to other MENA countries. So compared to, say, Morocco, Algeria, where there's still a lot of sunshine, the credit worthiness of those countries is substantially lower than in the UAE. So you're able to get lower cost finance, which makes projects a lot more viable here. The UAE is a regional banking hub. Abu Dhabi Global Markets is here. We've got a lot of big players who are investing a lot. So there's some big companies and some proper investment houses that are reducing the cost of capital and encouraging investment in the country.
How do regional geopolitical considerations impact the UAE's approach to hydrogen?
The UAE is diversifying. Hydrogen is a diversification opportunity for the UAE. It allows the country to maintain its global position in energy markets while kind of developing in a climate compatible way. The UAE's oil reserves aren't infinite, right? It will run out eventually in the UAE. For example, Dubai has pumped and sold nearly all of its oil. So Abu Dhabi is the kind of remaining emirate with oil production. That's expected to run out, estimates vary, but around 2050. And if the UAE wants to maintain a position in energy markets, it's going to need to do that through other means. The UAE has very strong renewable energy potential. It can transform those renewables into green hydrogen and use that as an energy export. I think geopolitically also, this country is an ally globally to Western markets, to the US and to Europe. And there's strong safety in creating an offtake agreement between the UAE and these Western markets. So in an era of geopolitical instability, I think the UAE in particular is a partner that can be trusted and relied upon.
Closely connected question: how does the UAE view hydrogen as part of its broader energy mix?
There's two angles to this. There's both a consumption and a production angle. From a consumption angle, the UAE is really focused on the export market. So kind of domestic consumption for hydrogen in terms of plans is relatively small in the longer term. My personal belief is that in the short term, it makes most sense to really create a domestic hydrogen market because it facilitates the creation of deals, of offtake agreements between local consumers and local producers, which therefore unlocks finance because you've produced a bankable project. So I think it makes sense to really stimulate and incubate a local demand market that can incrementally grow as the local supply likewise incrementally grows. One of the challenges around the hydrogen market is matching up supply and demand. I think that if you use certain off-takers like municipal buses or smaller scale demand centers that can grow incrementally as supply slowly comes online, you help to get this alignment between supply and demand locally that unlocks the larger market. At this point as well, one of the big challenges to an international kind of commodity hydrogen market is the challenge in shipping hydrogen. There's a lot of energy losses if you compress hydrogen. If you turn it into ammonia, there are kind of formation and cracking energy losses. So shipping hydrogen globally right now is a challenge. It's expensive. It makes more sense, in my opinion, to create a domestic market and wait for these other technologies to develop and improve before we dive into a global export market. I think from an energy consumption point of view, a lot of the UAE's renewables, I believe, will be going into hydrogen production in the future.
UAE focuses on green hydrogen. Is there any potential for blue hydrogen production?
Definitely. The UAE, though, isn't a big gas exporter. So blue hydrogen is made from cracking gas. The UAE actually imports gas from Qatar to power its own gas-fired power stations. The gas that it produces itself is sour gas, has a lot of sulfur in it. So it's not the best gas for producing blue hydrogen. Nevertheless, ADNOC, the big oil company, national oil company, is focused on blue hydrogen, and Masdar, the renewable energy entity, both investment and as a developer, is focused on green hydrogen. So there's a real clear differentiation of roles between blue and green. Blue is with ADNOC, the oil and gas company, and green is with Masdar. They both have a lot of investment behind them and are really working to make hydrogen a viable commodity here in the country and in the broader region.
You mentioned a domestic market. Building hydrogen pipelines and refueling stations is crucial. What concrete steps are being taken in UAE?
There is definitely a recognition that in the longer term, pipelines make the most sense for hydrogen transport. It requires, as all pipelines do, a lot of international cooperation. And similar to the hydrogen backbone that's being developed in Europe through the Netherlands, Germany, into France, and so on, Belgium, there's consideration of creating a similar type of transnational hydrogen backbone, connecting countries in the Middle East, potentially to countries in North Africa, and shipping hydrogen through pipeline under the Mediterranean into Southern Europe and then into the European network. These are long-term ambitions, but ones that I think will be required if we want to genuinely ship large volumes of hydrogen from this region to demand centers in Europe. The conversations are still in early days, so it takes a lot of money to build these types of pipelines, to test them and to make sure they have the characteristics that will keep hydrogen safe along the way, or keep everybody safe around these hydrogen pipelines. But yeah, ultimately that's, I think, the direction of travel. One more thing to mention there is that we focus a lot on shipping hydrogen to Europe. There's also a big demand center, a future demand center in India, I believe. So if hydrogen gets down to a reasonable production price, India is a lot closer than Germany to the UAE, and it makes sense to me to ship hydrogen east instead of northwest.
What are the key sectors in UAE, like transportation, industry, etc., that are most likely to drive early hydrogen demand and fuel investments?
I believe the transport sector is best placed to drive early demand. The volumes required for transport sector are relatively small compared to decarbonizing a big industrial plant. Also, as I mentioned before, there's an ease to kind of slowly scaling up, for example, a bus fleet or locomotives that run on hydrogen in lockstep with supply as it slowly grows. So I think in the early stages, the heavy goods transport sector is ideal for hydrogen use. Later on, then we move towards industrial players and maybe ships, so heavy shipping.
Finally, tell me, what's your take on the hydrogen hype?
I feel like the hype is there now because the world is starting to recognize that these hard to abate sectors need to figure out a solution to their emissions if we're to hit our 2050 net zero goals. And transforming an industry like iron, steel, like shipping and aviation, like chemicals, these are long-term, heavy-duty, structural changes to those sectors. And it's for that reason, I think, in light of increasing public awareness of the importance to tackle climate change, that that the pressure and the excitement around hydrogen has built over the past couple of years. I anticipate that in a hype curve, there's these kind of high expectations where people think hydrogen can be used for all kinds of things, and then this kind of valley that occurs afterwards until you get this kind of plateau of reality. I think we're reaching the peak of that hype curve now. I think we're starting to see really interesting innovations coming out very quickly that are bringing down the cost of hydrogen. But there's still a challenge around matching up supply and demand, and around making sure that those hydrogen consumers have the right types of incentives to adopt low carbon alternatives to their current production. So as the kind of news tightens around heavy emitters and big polluters, then I think the kind of demand side of hydrogen will really start to pick up. Right now, it feels more like a supply game and less of a demand game. So, wait a couple of years, and I think some of the hype will start to come true. In the meantime, I think it's challenging for some SMEs to establish themselves. And I also think there's a big influx of very low cost equipment coming in from China that's starting to make people question the viability of technology that's developed in Europe and the US. The costs that the Chinese can reach are incredibly low, which is great for the hydrogen industry, but challenging, I think, for some of the technology developers in these other markets.
Jeffrey, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you very much, Alice.